in this place still here for adjournment proceedings. I'm raising tonight a question that I initially asked in June of this year. I was basing my question on a written question on the order paper relating to the ongoing costs to the Canadian taxpayer of the reckless and pointless Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. And in the question on the order paper, I pointed out that the Minister of Finance had said earlier that year that with the rising costs of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, as demonstrated by the reports from the corporation itself, which is a Crown corporation owned by us, that she was going to ensure that no more public money went into this Crown corporation. My question on the order paper pointed out that the assessment of the ongoing debt of the project was reviewed by the TD Bank and described as confidential for commercial reasons. So we weren't going to get to find out. Now, independent economists within British Columbia, one of our leading economists, Robin Allen, had pointed out that no, we have ongoing costs for the tariffs, we have debt from the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, and that those debts are likely to be written off, leaving Canadians holding the bag once again. But as disturbing as the analysis about the ongoing debt of the Trans Mountain Pipeline is, it was the outrageous, and I'm first, the honourable member for Edmonton Centre, who's also the Minister for Tourism and also a Deputy Finance Minister, it was his response that forced me to think, this better come forward at adjournment proceedings. In the short space of his 30-second response, he made three statements that are not true factually. He probably believes they're factual. I'm not saying he's in any way dishonest. Most people seem to believe this rot. So let me just, number one, Canadians, he said, know how important it is to get our product to market and to Tidewater. Two mistakes there. There is no market for dilbit. Nobody in Asia is clamoring for dilbit. This is demonstrable and empirically true. And if we have another chance in late show, I will bring forward all the statistics of how few tankers have left Vancouver with available dilbit. There is no market. Number two in a ridiculous statement is that this project, this is just misleading, has led to 12,700 jobs once completed. That suggests this is a job creator. The job creation is only the construction. It creates less than 100 permanent jobs. And there will be many jobs if they ever have the horror of a seven-fold expansion of tankers carrying dilbit, because dilbit is a material that can't be cleaned up in the marine environment. So there will be many thousands of people going to shorelines in a futile attempt to restore the ecosystem if we allow this horror to happen. Third, in his statement, that if we do this, quote, Canadians will enjoy full price for our oil on the world market. This is another big whopper that's just impossible to be true. Dilbit is diluted bitumen. Bitumen is solid like tar. They add the diluent not to process it to make it more valuable, but to get something solid to move through a pipeline. And guess what? It is of very low value, inherently low value. It does not become more profitable or get to world price because it's at famous Tidewater. It's just a low-value product that's very expensive to produce and that produces more greenhouse gases than nearly any other fossil fuel. Lastly, he suggests it's going to be de-risked. The Minister of Finance says this too. It's nonsense. It's a risky project financially, and it's a fatal project environmentally.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And on many points, I disagree with the former leader and maybe even possibly the future leader of the Green Party. Madam Speaker, I think we need to be maybe a little bit more transparent on the issue. The Green Party, and this member in particular, on many occasions inside the House, has given her opinions on pipelines. And to her credit, she's been very articulate in terms of believing that there really is no justification whatsoever for Canada to develop or put into place pipelines. And if you were to further explore her thinking on it, it would be more so getting rid of pipelines that are currently in place. At least that's what I can recollect offhand. When you think of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, I would ultimately argue that it is indeed in Canada's national interest that we did what we did when we acquired it, Madam Speaker, because there was a great deal of interest and a great deal at stake. And at the end of the day, at some point in time, it will be divested. And that's when the member will be able to maybe ensure that there's a higher sense of accountability in terms of how it is divested and where we come out on the balance sheet on that divestiture. I am absolutely confident. She makes reference to the jobs, and well over 10,000 jobs even during its construction. And she might say that's a relatively low number of jobs in regards to once it has been constructed. But there is a resource that is there that is important, that I made reference to in terms of the national interest, Madam Speaker. And she didn't talk about that aspect of it. And I can appreciate why, because she doesn't believe that we should be tapping into resources of that nature. So suffice to say, Madam Speaker, when we talk about the Trans Mountain pipeline, one of the things that we need to recognize is that there's a difference in political approaches or philosophy on the issue. We constantly get targeted by members from the Greens, to a certain degree the New Democrats, and to a certain degree the Bloc, saying that we are doing too much to support our resource industries. Virtually every day we're being criticized by the Conservative Party of Canada, saying that we are not doing enough. Get more pipelines built. One of the first things we did, Madam Speaker, you will recall back in 2016, is establish a process that ensures that stakeholders are brought into it, a process that ensures that our environment is of the most significant concerns, that it is a part of the process. It has to be clearly demonstrated in that issue, not to damage our environment. And it also takes into consideration the economic factor or the national interest, Madam Speaker. And I think when you'll take a look at the Trans Mountain pipeline, that's the reason why it is that we're moving forward, that those have in fact been safeguarded, that we're very much in wanting to do this in the name of the national interest, Madam Speaker. And at the end of the day, once it does get divested, I think many of the potential answers that the member would like to see in regards to the feasibility of it will also.
Honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Well, I thank the honourable member for Winnipeg Centre, but oh my heavens. I need to say a few things. I intervened in the National Energy Board process. I read all 23,000 pages of their so-called evidence, and I can swear on a stack of Bibles, nowhere in there was there a cost-benefit analysis. In fact, the National Energy Board blocked the evidence from Unifor, the largest union in the oil sands, when they testified and had expert evidence that the pipeline project would cost Canadian jobs, and Unifor was against it. The National Energy Board said the jobs and the economy were not in their mandate, but magically ruled that, yes, there's a lot of environmental damage if this goes ahead, but it's in the national interest. I think the national interest is in a viable planet. I think the national interest is in making sure we try to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we know that every international body is saying no new fossil fuel infrastructure if you have an interest in human civilization surviving to when my daughter, now 31, is my age. By God, this must be stopped.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, the member makes reference to how I started off the comment. And that is that the member would ultimately argue that it is never in the interest, in the national interest, to build an inch of a pipeline. That's the essence in terms of what it is that she's saying. Now, some, not all, some New Democrats might agree with that assessment. But all one needs to do is take a look, for example, at the LNG project, where the provincial NDP, working along with the federal Liberals, recognized the natural resource and saw the national interest. And I like to think that that's where you'll see a little bit of a difference between the Greens and the New Democrats, is that under no circumstances whatsoever will the Greens ultimately see and acknowledge that any pipeline whatsoever would be in the national interest. And that's where we would have to disagree.
The